Singapore's sitting Prime Minister, Mr. Lawrence Wong.
Hey!
Welcome to the show.
What was your first day like as PM? Is it you suddenly joined a secret WhatsApp group?
Ministers.
I would not have put myself up ordinarily.
The PV government has lost touch with the worries of the common man. Wow! We need opposition voices in parliament for check and balance.
I'm damn stressed. Well,
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how to say this right, but we have the most unexpected guest that we'll probably ever have on the show. He was an economist in the Ministry of Trade and Industry and then the Ministry of Finance. He then became the Director of Healthcare Finance in the Ministry of Health before becoming the Principal Private Secretary for our third Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. He then went on to become the CEO of the Energy Market Authority before running for general elections in 2011 and is currently the Chairman of GIC's Investment Strategies Committee, the Minister of Finance, and did I mention? The Prime Minister of Singapore. I never thought I'd ever say this. Please welcome Singapore's sitting Prime Minister, Mr. Lawrence Wong.
hey!
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We were so nervous. I came here at 9 a.m. just to practice that. Still screwed up.
Still screw you up.
My armpit's sweating.
Well, thank you for having me, everyone.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
I wanted to start the interview quite introspectively, actually.
All right.
What should we know about your childhood that shaped the man you are today?
Wow.
Oh, quite a big one, quite a deep one.
Well,
Unselfish your question.
I've put things out on. People know I grew up in Marine Parade. I went to schools in the neighborhood, Hague Boys, and then where my mother was a teacher, I went to Tanjong Katong Technical, and then after that to junior college just next to my home, Victoria. Basically, I went to schools near my home.
Yeah.
Because it was very convenient.
Convenience was key.
I think no one in my family or my friends would have expected me to enter politics, frankly.
Why do you think so?
Because this was not anything on my mind.
Yeah.
I was just an ordinary kid going to schools, doing what everybody would do in school.
Yeah.
And then later on, fortunate enough to have a scholarship because my parents would not have been able to afford sending me overseas. But when you're young, you really want to go overseas. In those days, the only country I had been to for holidays was Malaysia.
Right.
You don't have the chance to travel abroad. So when you're young, you feel like going overseas, but you don't have the means to do so. So the only way was through a scholarship. So lucky enough to get a government scholarship to study overseas. Came back and worked in the public service, but never in my mind would I have thought about politics. It was only later in life that this happened. And then one thing led to another. Before you know it, I was leading the COVID task force after that.
So your one thing led to another is such a long What was the lead?
Well, you start in politics, you enter, you take on appointments, you start as a minister of state, then you get to run a ministry. I started in Ministry of Culture, MND, MOE, and then COVID happened, and before you know it, or before I knew it, we were looking at leadership transition. Who might be the next leader of the team? My colleagues chose me. So responsibility was given to me. I embraced it. And now I'm here and I'm doing my best to serve Singaporeans.
That is insane.
At that point in time when you say my colleagues chose me to lead, right? Was it like a don't pick me kind of a situation? Or do you I'm ready for the job?
Well,
Because we all love our country, correct?
Yeah.
But this job also comes with a lot of trade-offs.
I suppose I would not have put myself up ordinarily, but there was a stage when we had to decide who might be the successor to Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. And people were encouraging me to not rule myself out. So I had to ask myself the question, was I even prepared to have my name out there? If not, then I would say, no, please don't even put my name on the list.
Yeah.
But if I'm prepared to embrace that responsibility, then I let the process run its course. So I had to think through that consequence, whether I was prepared to do so. And I thought about it and I felt that I should not rule myself out, let the process run its course, let my colleagues decide. But then I have to be prepared, therefore, to step up to this new responsibility and embrace it, which in the end I have.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here now.
You mentioned about how at one point, the only place that you've been to overseas was Malaysia, and now you're traveling overseas for studies. What was that like, that
At that
culture
time?
shock? Yeah.
Huge culture shock. Huge. Because can you imagine at 18 or 19 or whatever age, can't remember now, I've never even taken a short plane ride, yes, but not long distance, and then to travel on my own.
Yeah.
All the way to the US. Fortunately, I had a roommate, American. It so happened, this is just one of those things. I brought my guitar with me
Okay.
to the US because I was really into music. One of the reasons why I really wanted to go to America to study was because of music.
Yeah.
So I brought my guitar with me and I went to my dorm and my roommate came. This guy with a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. and I was thinking to myself, gosh, talk about culture shock, right?
And you're going to get bullied together or something.
This will be very different.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
then before you know it, he brought his stuff into the room and he had a guitar with him.
So you can bond over, like jam together.
And then on that very night, we were already jamming together.
Wow.
A few nights later, we were out in the streets basking together.
Whoa.
Is it legal?
Yes,
Like,
of
can
course.
Oh.
Yeah. And you don't need to go for auditions.
Oh,
Like,
like Singapore.
anyone can go out.
Okay.
Well, your neighbors must really hate you guys just jamming all night.
See standard lah this time.
I think in
fair enough,
American
fair
dorms, it's all right.
Yeah.
There are
Noisier stuff happening.
noisier stuff happening than people jamming.
The one thing I was very surprised to learn, right, was that you recently revealed that you're an introvert. And to me, that would spark like, wow, politics must be such a difficult job for you. Then like, how do you reconcile that?
I suppose many people are introverts, but being an introvert doesn't mean that you don't enjoy being with people.
Yeah.
Being an introvert simply means you need your own space to reflect, you need time on your own, and I do. But one thing I do enjoy is, especially when you get to do engagements with residents, you get to talk to them, you get to learn more about them and build relationships with them. It is a very meaningful and fulfilling process. So I think it's not difficult to make that adjustment. Perhaps a different adjustment to make is not so much engaging with residents and building the relationships, which can happen on an ongoing basis, but being able to project and speak to large groups.
Okay.
Right.
That's not so much introvert or extrovert, that's public speaking.
Yeah.
Do
Right.
you practice that like in front of a mirror? No, because like I'm an introvert, right?
Yeah.
So every time I have to do presentation,
Yes.
I feel like I need to practice like where to put my hands, how do I look like.
Yeah.
Do you have that kind of training?
Well, I have not practiced in front of a mirror, but practice, yes, definitely.
Imagine if you practice.
Practice, definitely.
Okay.
Record and then look back and then
Right.
do rehearsals and then
Right.
look at the recording and see how it comes across, because
Right.
it's a skill. Public speaking is a skill.
So you do that.
I've had to, not just more
right,
recently,
right.
but over the course of years, since as a senior public servant
Yeah.
already.
Okay.
Because as a senior civil servant, you already have to speak to large groups. So already that started. And then more intensely after entering politics, for sure. For sure.
So you briefly touched upon it. Was there any special training that you had to do when you assumed the role of Prime Minister?
Not so much special training, it's just continuous. Because like
Okay.
I said, even after entering politics, there have been occasions where we would go for training. I've already done that as a civil servant, senior civil servant, and then more so after entering politics, within the government and the party, we have different relationships with training providers. We will engage them. We would, for example, do an exercise with a training provider, speak on a particular topic.
Right.
I speak, and then he looks at it, he critiques, and
It's
then
like
they
school.
critique. It's like school, right? And then they will critique, they will look at it, they will tell you, this part can be better. It's
Right.
necessary, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
It's important. I mean, I don't do it so much now in a systematic way, but now what I would do is just listen to my own playback, right? Listen to what I have done, get a recording of it, and then review. And when you start doing it for the first time, you cringe, right?
Yeah.
Even when you hear your voice, you cringe and you say, I don't think I sound like that.
Yes.
But you do. You do sound like that. And then you cringe when why is it that? So even now when I look back at some of my earlier interviews, I feel like I was rambling, for example.
Yeah.
I feel I was too long-winded. And I feel I could have done better.
Yeah.
And I think it's useful because if you don't do that, then you will never learn, you'll never improve.
But also you reach the point of one of the highest officers in Singapore already. So like, at this point, it's very hard to say, hey, can you get me a public speaking coach? Then nobody wants to coach you. Also. You know, at this point of time, it's like,
Do you know what is MBTI?
Yeah, sure.
Do you know your MBTI?
I think I do.
I feel like it's INFJ lah. That's my guess before you say.
Oh,
Is
okay.
it?
You're not bad. You're not bad. You're pretty close. I am IN and the F and T are very borderline.
Right.
But INFTJ.
Oh,
okay,
not
wow.
bad.
Yeah, we are pretty close.
so you almost Prime Minister quality.
So what does it mean?
Are you an MBTI coach?
No, but I'm very into this kind of thing. So when I see
Enthusiast.
people, I like to guess
Uh-huh.
based on their vibe. And then looking at all your interviews and all your videos, right? I feel like, wow, you're INFJ because it's like an advocate kind. And normally those kind of people, they come off as extroverted.
She's very proud of herself right now because she brought it up earlier. She wasn't sure
Yeah,
whether
I
she
was
should
like,
bring it
common
up.
is INFJ.
I'm actually quite curious to know what was your first day like as PM? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, lor. And who do you call and be like, what should I be doing? You know, what I mean? 'Cause who's the boss?
I know what the job entails in the sense because as you said just now, I was the principal private secretary to Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. He was Prime Minister. So I kind of know what it's like. Observing the role from a distance or even in a close relationship is very different from when you are actually doing it yourself. But still, there is a bit of a learning curve, but it wasn't too difficult. After a while, you settle in, you know, kind of. There are different aspects to it. There's the international, the external aspects, the building relations with my counterparts. There are the domestic aspects of it. And then, of course, as Prime Minister, you're not just looking after a particular ministry. So that's the difference. As a minister, you can focus on your ministerial role. One portfolio. As PM, you have to look at the whole nation. Basically, all the difficult issues come to you. Right? So there's never a dull moment in this job.
Right.
So usually, like if someone leaves a job or we go on leave, we prepare like a handover document for the next person, right? Did Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong like give you any handover documents?
We've had lots of discussions prior. We've had lots of discussions, and even now he continues to be in the cabinet. He's senior minister, and from time to time, when I have need for his advice or views, I will call on him, and he will share his perspectives.
Right.
Okay.
So
no funny notes.
before we move on to more serious stuff.
Yeah.
So when you call on Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong,
I
right?
call him, or I call,
It's like a WhatsApp, like a.
I can call him over the phone. I can meet him. We have cabinet meetings frequently. We meet for lunches. There are different
It's like
ways.
chill lah.
Yeah, it's quite informal.
Got like WhatsApp group.
Yeah, is it you suddenly join a secret WhatsApp
Like
group?
ministers.
There's
Like
no,
Coach
there's
Tong
no,
inside.
there's no secret WhatsApp.
Oh, okay.
Sorry to disappoint you. It's very
You haven't
plain.
invited. They
It's
haven't
very
invited you.
plain vanilla.
That's why he gets excluded from the other.
Yeah.
Because now boss, right? Boss level, they always exclude the boss.
Oh, I see. You mean like that?
Suddenly your minister group chat quiet, right? They stop talking. Like, you don't meet anymore.
No, it's. I'm still in all of the chat groups
Okay.
anyway because I was there already.
Yeah.
As an MP, as a junior office holder, as a minister, I was always there. I've not removed myself
Right,
from
right.
any of these groups.
That's
I
true.
mean, as someone that's been an entrepreneur for a few years,
as boss,
there's another group already lah. It's just
they might break up without you knowing. So, like, do you work in the same office room that
We are in the
Mr.
same
Lee-
building.
Okay.
The main Istana building is undergoing renovation, but we moved to Sri Temasek. But regardless, that building would typically house the Istana president, the PM, and senior minister.
Okay.
I did not know that.
In terms of office.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
In terms of
Nice.
office.
So like no secret menu stuff. He's like, okay, now as a PM, right, you can order this special sandwich that the chef makes. and it's
No,
superb.
there's nothing like that. Again, sorry to disappoint you. It's very ordinary.
Really?
Or like-
Because I would think that the
Dow
position is so important. The role is so important. I would think that you have to optimize your health, your diet, everything must be like planned for you so that you can perform at your best. You know what I mean? You don't have like a team.
It's just another job.
I mean, a lot of this is self-responsibility. Right? So it's not as though somebody is planning my diet and my nutrition for me. I do have annual checkups and the doctors will check and make sure that nothing is wrong. When the PM goes overseas, there is a doctor that will be a part of the delegation in case there's a medical emergency.
Right.
In terms of regular day-to-day looking after your own health, I have to watch my own diet. I have to make sure I keep up with my exercise regime, which is very challenging, but I try my best. And then,
Do you feel a bit sian that every time you go on leave, right, you have to announce it to the whole world, and then there will be a Straits Times or CNA article that says PM Wong now going on leave for the next 2 weeks?
Well, this is part of the job. This is part of the job. As a minister, I didn't have to.
Yeah.
But when you're prime minister, there is an official responsibility. You do need an acting prime minister. You do need to make clear that you're not around.
Why?
Because there are national responsibilities. A national emergency can happen, right? And something that requires decision making at the highest level could happen. So you do have a responsibility to let the nation know you are away and that there is a covering arrangement.
Well, I think it's time for the serious questions.
Those are not serious questions.
I want to fast forward to last year's ND because I think it was very, very interesting, right? At the rally, you have taken a very obviously new direction for Singapore in terms of like welfare and redefining success, evident by the extended parental leaves. I think that was one. I think the other was like allowances for unemployment, which I thought was quite surprising. And you've also been spearheading the foreword.sg movement. What motivated this shift?
Society is changing. Our external environment is different. We are a different society, different generation. So there will be different expectations, different needs. And I think one of the main issues of our time will be how we can keep our society closely knitted, cohesive, and together. It's not unique to Singapore, this challenge, because you see this everywhere around the world. Countries are becoming more divided, more polarized. The middle ground is hollowing out, and you have extreme views pushing society in different directions. So politics becomes dysfunctional, countries become very hard to govern. We don't want that to happen in Singapore. And that's why we are proactively engaging in this Forward Singapore exercise with the real purpose of looking at how we can refresh our social compact and keep Singapore strong and united. And that means being prepared to review and reset our policies. It's not to change for the sake of change, but because it's a different circumstance, different environment, we have to be bold in reviewing our policies, and where things need to be updated, we should update them. We should not be satisfied with just the status quo. We cannot afford to just cruise along.
Right.
We have to keep on changing and improving in order to address the issues of our time. That's what Forward Singapore is about. And that's why we embark on the changes we did.
Would you say that because in the past policies do get updated nonetheless, right? So right now, would you say that with your leadership, you are looking to more robustly overhaul a lot of the policies that no longer serve us?
Every leader would want to do that and has been doing that. And so similarly, I would say I am focused on looking at how we can improve. And that would involve not change for change's sake. And if there are fundamentals, if there are things that are sound, we should continue and uphold them. But I do believe there are many areas which we can improve. And that requires major resets, not just in policies, but in our attitudes and in our mindsets. So some of the things we did last year, for example, unemployment support. We decided that this was timely to do something, and we introduced this new scheme, a job seeker support scheme. So if someone gets unemployed, we provide support for him financially, help him to reskill, get a job, and bounce back stronger. So that's something we did. I think there will be more to come in this year and the following years, where we will continue this process of updating our social support system and making sure that there is greater assurance for every Singaporeans through their life stage.
What I'm curious is that, like, what has changed? Because I think from the Singapore before your time as Prime Minister, it always felt like these like welfare parts were very un-Singaporean almost. I'm curious what changed?
It's not that it's un-Singaporean, but we were always concerned that if you overdo things, you may create a sense of entitlement, over-dependency, and you can erode the work ethic. These concerns remain, mind you. That's why even when we talked about unemployment benefit, we were very careful how to go about doing it and making sure that we do it in a way that encourages people to find jobs, get trained, and bounce back stronger. It's not just to provide benefits and support so generously that it becomes better to stay unemployed.
Incentivized to do nothing.
So these concerns remain, but I think the change is motivated by the reality that we are in a more challenging environment with globalization, with rapid technological changes. Workplaces will get more and more disrupted. And as I said, we do not ever want a Singapore where people feel like they are going to lose out, where people feel that there's no hope for the future. We want to make sure that our society stays strong together and everyone can benefit from the nation's progress.
So you spoke about the ever-changing landscape of the world. In Singapore's history, I think our leaders have faced crises like independence, with like pandemics, even financial crashes. What do you see as your defining challenge of sorts as your term as PM?
Prior to becoming PM, the biggest challenge was COVID, of course.
Of course.
I think that was a huge challenge. Going forward, I don't know what new crisis will emerge. Nobody knows. It can be a new financial crisis. Who knows, with tariffs going up, it can be an economic crisis. It could be another pandemic. No one can tell. But my concern for Singapore will be, number one, that we are entering a more dangerous world. I mean, you look at the global landscape today, it is very troubling. Geopolitical rivalries and tensions, the economic fragmentation that's happening. We are not in the same situation as we were, say, 30 years ago. So it will be a much more difficult external environment, which means it will impact on Singaporeans. And number two, because it impacts on Singaporeans, how do we hold together and keep Singapore together as a people, as a society? Because once we don't have that sense of cohesion, once we start to fragment, become divided, I think we are finished as a country.
Speaking about that cohesion, because of course as Singaporeans, there are also many different groups with differing agendas, with differing hopes of where the direction of Singapore will be taken.
Yeah.
How then do you reconcile all these different like agendas and interests?
Well, that's one of the unique Singaporean strengths, which we must continue to uphold, which is that each time we confront an issue, while there are different groups, different stakeholders, different views, we have always been able to come together, engage one another, and then try to find some form of a compromise or a consensus that will take us forward. It's never a case where it's I demand my maximum, you demand your maximum, and therefore we all start to clash and go for all-out war.
Yeah.
We have avoided that.
Where do you see this compromise happening? Because the way we see, I mean, at least on the internet lens, right?
Yeah.
The people that own properties want property price to go up. I die also want to go up. I'll die on that mountain. Then people that's trying to buy property on property price will go down. They will die on that mountain.
And all are Singaporeans.
Yeah. So I don't see them going, oh, you know what? You are right, you know?
Yeah. Well,
Where do you see?
internet may not be very representative, but I give an example. We talked about uplifting lower wage workers.
Okay.
So making sure that lower wage workers have higher salaries. It would have been very easy to say, let's just pass a minimum wage law. Everyone in Singapore must have at least this wage. And then I say, well, employers, you go and take care of it yourself.
Yeah.
I don't care. And then the employers, if that were to happen, will say, well, if that's the case, then I must pay more. Then I will either close or I will charge my consumers more.
Yeah.
Then the consumers will end up paying more amidst cost of living, but they will have to pay more. So how do you solve this problem? And again, in Singapore, we solve it by coming together and saying, look, there is an issue. We want to raise the wages of our lower wage citizens. How do we do it? We do it progressively. We have progressive wages. We don't just mandate higher wages. We train them. We increase their productivity. That's number one. Number two, even with that, yes, there will be higher labor costs. Employers pay more, but the government leans forward and we co-share some of the responsibility. Right. So we are also helping the employers to pay lower wage workers higher salaries so that this will cushion the impact on consumers. So it's true that tripartite arrangement, we come up with a plan. We don't do it overnight. We stage some of these over a number of years and we have a consensus to move forward. That's the Singapore way. You may not see all that because a lot of these discussions are happening behind the scenes, but I think it's, and usually when we do these sorts of things, it means we take more time. Yeah. Right? You have to work through and then you have to engage one another, come to a consensus. But I think the effort is well worth the while because it leads to a more durable and sustainable outcome.
sometimes when like reaching compromises, there will be maybe one or two groups that may be somewhat
Yeah,
unhappy.
for sure.
I'm curious, like, is there like a framework or decision-making process where it's like, okay, this is the path of least unhappiness or like a cost-benefit analysis?
It's not just about least unhappiness. I think we also have to do what's right for Singapore and Singaporeans. Sometimes there will be unpopular things to do. I mean, I've had to raise taxes. As finance minister, I think if you were to say path of least,
We understand.
path of least resistance or most happiness, I don't think this is one of the things that people will volunteer to do. But when you look at our state of public finances, when you look at the increase in healthcare expenditure that's needed over the coming years because of our aging population, you do need more resources. And then you have to explain. Even though it's unpopular, we have to do it, but we explain. And this is not new. Even during COVID, we have had to take many unpopular decisions, whether it was a circuit breaker or the different restrictions that we had to put on gatherings. These were not popular at all. But still, it was necessary. And again, we had to explain and persuade Singaporeans these were the things that we had to do.
You talked about having to make unpopular choices, right? And sometimes it's clear in a sense whereby you do have the numbers to raise taxes. For example, we need this income because of inflow outflow. But then there are some things that are a bit more moral, because you also talked about doing what's right for Singapore. Sometimes having to make the right decisions, which are often the painful, unpopular decisions. So when you, for example, repealed, or when Singapore government repealed 3778, who is to say what's right for Singapore in those? And I'm not trying to get political on this agenda.
Sure.
It's just who has the moral compass here?
Well, on such social issues where there are very differing views, like you say, it's very hard to explain that or to justify that by cost-benefit analysis.
Correct. Everybody's right in that,
right? You can't. But here, I think we have to take stock of where social norms are, what the views of the public are, and then we have to consider from the government's point of view, not to lead social norms or social views, but to find a consensus that will allow us to move forward without causing a lot of divisions. And on something like 377A, I think views have evolved over the years. We accept LGBTQ people in our society. They are Singaporeans. And 377A, we always knew was something that would be challenged.
Yeah.
And increasingly, the courts were indicating that it could be challenged.
I see.
And it could be very well struck down
Yeah.
as a law. And therefore, we decided, rather than the decision made by the courts, because they were already being challenged in courts, and rather than it being struck down and removed by the courts, like has happened in America, a lot of these decisions are made not in parliament, but by judges who are not elected.
Right.
And I think that's not the right way of doing it. The right way of doing it is to have decisions made in parliament by representatives who are elected by the people.
Right.
And that's why we decided we make a move to repeal the law 377A, but at the same time, we amend the constitution to uphold the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
Because if 377A is challenged, the next thing that can be challenged is the institution of marriage.
Yeah.
The balance we decided was repeal 377A, but update the laws to protect the institution of marriage.
Right.
That was what happened. And we discussed all that, we debated, and we made the changes in Parliament.
I see. So there are a lot of warning signs. I mean, there are a lot of signs that we simply don't see. For example, it's getting challenged in court a lot. I see.
Direction.
You were shaking your head. What you want to do?
I'm damn stressed. I hear so many things you need to think about. Wow, I cannot.
It's a difficult job.
We stick to making YouTube videos.
This is the head of content strategy.
INFJ people quite good for Prime Minister.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Sorry?
INFJ people quite good for Prime Minister because they...
What?
Advocate.
It's not such a waste.
they're
Yeah.
to hold on to this personality and do any other job.
You've also spoken about like new definitions of success.
Yes.
And that really spoke to me as like a new dad, right? But I'm also very
congratulations.
Oh, thank you. I didn't mean to insert that as a congratulations.
Sure. Not in time for the enhanced parental leave.
No.
But hopefully you can make another baby
For
and
number
then
two.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wait for the
and
2026
benefit
one.
from
In
for the
fact, it was
additional
just
10
nice.
weeks of leave.
Exactly.
When his paternity ended, I think 1-2 weeks later, then he made the announcement.
It's okay, number two. No, but the reason why it got me very interested is that I'm also someone who's very interested in music and also in sport. And like there was one point in my life, right, where I thought, okay, maybe I can pursue that as a career. But now that I become an adult and grown up and a bit boring, right?
Yeah.
I don't know whether like based on what you talked about, new definition of success, whether I can ethically or morally encourage my son if he grows up and says, I want to be a musician, whether I can say, okay, go for it. You know, I don't know if I can do that.
Does daddy need to be rich before daddy say, okay, go for it?
I understand the concerns. I think my starting point when we talk about everyone pursuing your own path is this, that it is human nature to compare. If my sense of well-being is based solely on how I do relative to another person, I think it will be very frustrating. And it can be very oppressive too, because we end up trapped in this endless rat race, really just trying to outdo one another. So I go back to I think the start point must be we are all different. We have different abilities and talents and strengths, and we should be pursuing our own paths. Right? And even less conventional ones. Everyone should choose their own path, and we should be able to flourish and thrive in our own terms, on our own terms, in ways that can be more open, more adventurous, less prescribed. So that's my hope for Singapore going forward. Now, then you say, well, if someone has the ability, the talent to be a musician and to excel at that level, should they go for it? I say, by all means, yes, why not? And indeed, we are better preparing students for that. We have SOTA, School of the Arts. We have the University of the Arts now in Singapore. Or for that matter, if you're into sports, we do see more and more young Singaporeans being prepared to train full-time for sports and to excel at the very highest levels. You may say, well, is it realistic, right? Because you look around and you say,
That's the important part.
is it viable? Is it practical? Well, then I put to you like this. Because I used to have that dream too when I was young. I might be a musician. But if you look at music solely in the sense of performing arts, performing to live audiences, and you say, look, as a musician, I have to grow my audience, it is very challenging, right? It is very challenging. You have to do many, many gigs. You have to work very hard. And then it's not just growing the audience in Singapore, but also overseas. If you really want to be successful, you can't just count on the Singaporean audience. You have to grow overseas. So you really need to have the talent for it, and you have to have that ability to work very hard for it. But at the same time, recognizing that doing that alone is challenging, I do see many musician friends who develop a portfolio of work. It's not just performing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? They have a day job. They could be teaching music. They could be a DJ.
Right.
Some who are really into the technical aspects of music.
Yeah.
Then they develop, they study, and then they become sound engineers.
Yeah,
They do production work in the studio. So you have a portfolio of work. You're not just a music. You're not just earning a living by playing the guitar and performing on stage.
Yeah.
But you are developing a portfolio of work that enables you to have a viable career in music. I think that's possible.
That's a really, really good answer.
Fair enough.
That's a really good
Yeah,
answer.
shit, man. Yeah, that was a good answer. Damn it.
Speaking of young people and also the internet, I think we've also started to see quite a lot of posts on like Reddit and forums of young people who feel like, and whether it's right or not, maybe they have a misperception about it, but they feel like they may not earn enough to retire and that homes are expensive and they can't afford it. Are they right to be worried?
Well, again, I can understand the concerns. It's not unique to Singapore because if you look around the world, young people have very similar concerns about jobs, retirement, housing. And I would say that objectively speaking in Singapore, in fact, we are not in a bad position relative to these places because in Singapore, why do I say that? In Singapore, if you're a young person, we have an excellent education system that prepares you very well for a globally competitive environment. And survey after survey will show that we young Singaporeans are in demand after they graduate and they can get good jobs. Once you start working, we support you with Skills Future. And so long as you work consistently, doesn't mean that you have to work 100% of the time throughout your working life, but fairly consistently throughout working life. We have the CPF system supported by employers and the government to assure you of your basic retirement needs. And where housing is concerned, unlike many other places, we have public housing. We have HDB, which will ensure that homes remain affordable. It doesn't mean that all of these are perfect. Like I said earlier, we must continue to review our social support schemes, which we are through Forward Singapore. So in housing, we have now a new classification system, standard, prime, plus flats. We have enhanced housing subsidies. With Skills Future, we have done a lot more to provide resources to help Singaporeans reskill and upskill. We have the unemployment support with the job seeker support scheme. So we continue to improve and strengthen the social support mechanisms to provide assurance to all Singaporeans.
It does feel like, that saying, bad times create strong men, and then it ends with good times create weak men. And it's starting to feel like we are at the tail end of a good times, looking at how the global climate is changing. And then,
But we have been through bad and good times, in Singapore.
many cycles.
Many cycles of good and bad.
It does feel like, to me, your next cycle is going to be a tough, it's a bad time cycle. Not for Singapore, not your performance is globally, right? And it also kind of feels like, in the past when we look at our parents' generation and they're buying landed property at certain prices, and you look at the bubble that we are almost living in today, it does feel like to the young in Singapore. And that's how I would describe Gen Z mentalities, right? When I'm going on a panel and they ask me, what Gen Z is thinking? I'm not Gen Z, okay, I'm 35. My thoughts on that, I look 40 actually. My thoughts on that is that it does feel like they've begun to realize that they're living in an increasingly bleak outlook. And it's very, very hard when the outlook is so bleak from around the world that I want to project 50 years into the future.
Yeah.
Because there is no set things I know I can do now that assures a comfortable retirement at 70. There isn't anymore. It doesn't feel like there is anymore. And so that kind of shapes that Gen Z mentality or young people mentality of, we don't know what 50 years will be. We really don't know. It feels very YOLO, very hopeless now.
Yeah.
And so we do what makes ourselves happy today.
It's understandable, like I said, but it's not the first time that we are in a difficult situation. In the 60s, it was super bleak. When this year is 60 years.
Confirm.
This year is 60 years of independence. If you talk to someone like my mother, who's 85 this year, and they grew up in that generation, in the 60s, in the 70s, it was very bleak.
Right.
Worse than today.
Confirm.
Right? And yet that generation, the pioneer generation, they slogged it through, they worked hard, and they did it all for themselves, but also to make sure that the next generation have a better future.
Yeah.
And we managed that. Things got better after the 80s, 90s, during that period. And then Singapore flourished, we grew, we prospered in a global order because of globalization, because of free trade. We really prospered and we succeeded. And I think now, as you say, we are at a different stage of the cycle where the world is moving in a different direction. And so it will be a more inhospitable environment for us. But I think we should draw confidence from the fact that we went through great adversity before, and we can do it again now, today, with Singapore in a much, much stronger position than we were in 1965. Well, what did we have in 1965? We had so little. But today we are in a much stronger position, better resourced. Singapore's brand is very strong, greatly admired internationally. Young people today, I think, while we recognize the frustrations or the concerns, I hope will also appreciate that you are in a Singapore today where conditions are attractive, where things are much better than previous generations, where there are many more opportunities for you to pursue different dreams, to maximize your potential. And where housing is concerned, we will always ensure that public housing remains affordable so that everyone can have a good home here.
I wanted to touch on a little mini segment, I think, which is really about like how would you I just want to get some of your thoughts on these narratives. Okay, so I think we all know that GE is probably somewhere on the horizon. You probably can't tell us when.
It is going to be this year.
For sure, but which month? I think a lot of people are taking bets, right?
Okay, what's your guess?
The one later we say correct, then you change.
June.
I think
May, June.
October.
Okay.
May June.
Anyway, in recent past general elections, I think there have been certain narratives that have like come about and are shaping up, and I'm keen to know some of your thoughts on these statements. I didn't come up with
Okay.
that. The first is we want PAP to govern, but we need opposition voices in parliament for check and balance. What are your thoughts on that?
I want a system of checks and balances in Singapore. I think that's necessary. And the reality is the opposition in Singapore is here to stay. Already in Parliament nowadays, we have very long debates going well into the night, late hours of the night, discussing and debating major issues. And outside of Parliament, Singaporeans are free to express their views, sometimes very robustly too. In fact, we have in Singapore a system of democracy based on consent and mandate. And ultimately, the biggest check is Singaporeans themselves. Singaporeans will decide who governs the country. That's why I don't assume, just because the PAP has been in power for so long, that we will automatically win the next election. It's in the end something that Singaporeans will have to decide. And I, as leader of the party, will have to work very hard in the election, present the report card of what we have done over the term, our plans to take Singapore forward, and hopefully be able to persuade Singaporeans to give us their support and their mandate to govern Singapore.
Oh, your job's so hard. Huh?
Yeah, that's right.
I stress
I
and
just
just
think about it, so tired for you. Sir.
Statement number 2. The PAP government has lost touch with the worries of the common man. Thoughts on that?
You do hear this being expressed from time to time. What I can assure people is, if you look at my team and I, we are on the ground continuously engaging Singaporeans and residents, listening to their views and hearing their feedback. That's why even after I've taken on office as PM, I've made it a point to go around different constituencies, visiting, engaging residents, and being on the ground, just listening to them. And I will continue with that practice. The reality is that it's very hard to be an incumbent party.
Yes.
Right? In politics, being an incumbent is always difficult. And if you look at elections last year was the year of elections. Incumbents everywhere took a beating, and some even lost the right to govern.
UK, US,
Yes.
yeah.
Because one of the reasons was inflation, cost of living.
Yeah.
Inflation, cost of living is not usually the fault of the incumbent party. You know, it's every country is facing high inflation, but because cost of living pressures, people feel the difficulties. They are unhappy, and what happens in an election? The incumbent party suffers. This is politics. So this is the reality in Singapore. The PAP has been incumbent for a long time, 65 years, since 1959 when we attained self-government. It is very, very hard to keep an incumbent party in power for so long. And that means I have to work even harder to engage Singaporeans, to persuade them and to hopefully get support and trust from Singaporeans at the elections.
It's just sad, no? Because like you could easily be like in the private sector, a CEO of a massive MNC, like living the life, but then here you are as Prime Minister doing like you could do an amazing job, but every 5 years you still need to go, guys, vote for me.
I think that's necessary. That keeps us in check, and that's what democracy is about.
Last question. You're a huge chapter marker. Like Singapore was a book. You're a huge chapter marker in the story of Singapore. If you could write a prologue or a foreword before your chapter unfolds, what would you like to tell Singaporeans?
Well, I would say we are now entering a new phase of nation building. I'm the first Prime Minister to be born after independence.
Oh, wow.
All my predecessors,
We are so young.
Or you flex your age.
all my predecessors sang 2 or even 3 different national anthems. If you think about it, right? God Save the King, Kimigayo, Negaraku.
Wow.
I've only sung one national anthem,
Yeah.
Majulah Singapura. So it's a different generation. It's a new phase. I mean, I've embraced this new responsibility, and I will do my best to serve Singapore and Singaporeans. And I hope that we can walk this journey together to take Singapore to even greater heights.
Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you to Prime Minister Lawrence Wong for joining us today in this episode. We'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You know what's very sian for the job? It's not like Lawrence Wong be PM. Then it's like, I try my best because I love my country, right? Then if I don't like it, then we change the guy in 2 years. Because the job traditionally has been held on for 20 years, right?
You have to be prepared that it doesn't continue for 20 years. That's politics.
Or that it continues for 20 years, which is equally shong. It could. That's what my fear is. You know what? Like the first day, oh my god, I got 20 years of this.